And wherever I go, I find a robust debate. And particularly, I find an embrace of an ambitious vision for the future. That's a deep characteristic, I think, a natural instinct, maybe just in the DNA of Indians. I'm reminded that perhaps the sole constant here is change. Change defined by innovation in nearly every single sector and industry, change that is demanded by a hungry, and I mean intellectually hungry and lifestyle hungry population, driven by the extraordinary transformation of an emerging economy into a dynamic and diversified marketplace. It's really an extraordinary story. Put simply, the India that I first encountered in the early 1990s was already a regional leader, and it was a regional leader of growing importance. Now, it is an established power with a footprint that affects the entire planet. And whether it is efforts to preserve our environment or uphold international norms and law or ensure security of the global commons, in all of those, India is playing a tremendous and important role. The United States has not only welcomed this rise, but we made a strategic decision, a choice to encourage it, because India is an essential partner in advancing our mutual interests of prosperity and security. And because we are, after all, the world's two largest democracies, bound by common values, values of tolerance, equality, respect for religious pluralism, and a yearning for peace. And those are really important uniters. They are a bond of glue in and of themselves. Now, both in Washington and here in Delhi, our leaders recognize the importance and the imperative of this relationship, which is why President Obama has made strengthening U.S.-India bonds a top priority in our rebalance to Asia, and it is why Prime Minister Modi, for his part, has called America an indispensable partner in his address to Congress in June, and why between the two of them, it is clear that President Obama and Prime Minister Modi have forged a personal relationship that is built on a common sense of purpose and vision. In recent years, because of this, we have nearly doubled our two-way trade flow, and the United States is now India's top export market. We've joined forces to support the people and the government of Afghanistan, to rescue earthquake victims in Nepal, to evacuate men and women who were trapped by violence in Yemen, and to train peacekeepers in Africa. And yesterday I had the pleasure of sharing with my counterpart, Foreign Minister Swaraj, the commonality of this endeavor that we are now engaged in. Our peoples are connected through 3 million Indian Americans, many of whom have assumed leadership roles in public service, academia, medicine, law, business, from Silicon Valley to my hometown of Boston. Our universities, including IIT Delhi, are collaborating on projects in public health, cybersecurity, high-tech, clean energy, and more. And our governments are now engaged on more substantive issues in more vital areas than at any time in the history of this relationship. Now, we saw evidence of the depth and breadth of these bonds just yesterday during our annual strategic dialogue, when we held high-level talks on issues that impact virtually every single aspect of our shared future, from the fight against violent terrorism, extremism, to our immense and still growing commercial relationship, to ensuring wise governance of the Internet, to the resolution of volatile situations in the Middle East, South Sudan, Myanmar, and elsewhere. And at a time when countries all too often seek to settle disputes through unilateral action or the use of force, we together chose a different route. We have agreed to work through rule of law and through the norms of the international community. And so we have discussed yesterday how India's decision to accept an international tribunal judgment regarding its maritime border with Bangladesh actually stands apart from other choices made by other countries. So this is the kind of policy in support of rule of law that, in my judgment, reflects confidence, and it reflects a sense of responsibility. It is a model for how potentially dangerous disputes in different trouble spots can be resolved peacefully, including the South China Sea, where the United States continues to call on China and the Philippines to abide by the tribunal's recent decision, which is final and legally binding on both parties. Now, this is a crucial opportunity to uphold the existing rules-based international order, and don't for an instant underestimate the importance of that order. We spent enormous energy in the aftermath of World War II in order to try to build it, and it has served us well. It helped us win and end the Cold War, and it helped us set on a new course for the 21st century. And so it is important for us to respect the international order, to show respect for international law, and to support regional stability and prosperity. The bottom line, my friends, is that the deep cooperation between India and the United States matters a great deal to both of our countries, but it also matters to the rest of the world. Obviously, for one reason, it represents 1/6 of all of humanity on this planet. But also it represents the coming together of two different cultures, different experiences, one much older than the other, not as a democracy, but older as a country, and certainly exhibits a kind of respect for a healthy debate and for the rights and freedom of individuals. So the question for both of our nations and for our next generation of leaders, some of you sitting right here now, I'm sure all of you, in one respect or another, whatever you in walk of life you choose to move down, the great question is how to ensure that our bilateral relationship is prepared fully to confront the dangers we face and to seize the opportunities that are staring us in the face. And answering this question correctly will make all the difference, because a rising India will play a critical role in resolving global challenges, challenges to the rules-based order, challenges posed by extremism and terrorism, challenges posed by extreme poverty, which I might add, for the first time in human history, has now moved below 10%, just to show you what can be achieved. Challenges of uneven and unsustainable growth that still leaves far too many people on the margins. This is, above all, not a theoretical exercise. It's a practical question that, for better or worse, we, those of us in positions of responsibility, certainly have to answer every single day. And how we answer that call will have a real consequence for Indians and Americans alike. Now let me begin with the number one responsibility of anyone in a position of leadership, and that is security and defense. In the first speech by a leader of India to the United States Congress, delivered back in 1949, Prime Minister Nehru said that throughout her long history, India has stood for peace, and every prayer that an Indian raises ends with an invocation to peace. I want to assure you that the primary goal of America's foreign policy is peace, stability, and shared prosperity. And we also appreciate that lasting peace requires strong diplomacy and deep cooperation with partners across the globe. And I can proudly say to you today that for all of the criticism that sometimes is directed our way, because yes, we make mistakes, and we have made some, and some have been beauties. But for all of those mistakes and for all of the efforts, I can't think of a country in the world that has conquered as much territory and turned around and given it back to people who owned it. World War I, World War II. Throughout history, our effort has been as a nation to try to give life to our Constitution, to our Declaration of Independence, and to the rights of human beings, the ability of people to live in dignity, to be able to make their own choices, and to be able to show respect for other human beings. And despite our mistakes, we continue, I think, whether it is in our work together on something like Ebola or Zika virus, or in curing diseases, or our work to bring peace to nations in conflict, we try to make a difference to hold up those values that I just described. And the fact is that we're living in a different world, the world of the last century that I grew up in and many of you grew up in, a world of potential nuclear conflict and a great divide between the Soviet Union and the West, a world in which our relationship got somewhat caught up by people who didn't understand the concept of neutrality or found it somehow incompatible with their own ambitions and goals. That world has changed and gone different. The fact is that whereas conflict was waged between state actors, and millions upon millions of people died in the course of those wars, during this part of the century, at least in the 21st century, conflict is described by non-state actors, and the disruption of non-state actors with the global system no longer divided between East and West or North and South, with power coming from the bottom up as much as from the top down. Leading nations cannot simply ignore threats beyond our borders because in this interconnected and globalized world that we live in today, the dangers that are somewhere else are not really far away at all. Those dangers will inevitably cross borders. So we have to confront the challenges of this world together. President Obama and Prime Minister Modi both appreciate this. So they have expanded our cooperation on mutual defense and security issues to an unprecedented level. This starts with America's support for India's defense modernization, and it extends to the increasingly complex training exercises that our armies and navies conduct each year, and the new logistics agreement that was just signed by our defense ministers earlier this week in Washington. It is further evidenced in our cyber framework, which is focused on reducing cyber crime and encouraging responsible behavior in cyberspace and trying to establish standards which people can live by with respect to cyberspace. It is defined further by our backing for India's emergence as a net security provider in the Indian Ocean, and in our efforts to help India obtain the defense capabilities and technologies that it needs in order to carry out its expanding global role. And we commit to bolster institutions that strengthen international norms in the Pacific, in the Indo-Pacific. And we will also continue to expand our coordination with nearby nations like Japan so that this entire region can remain stable and secure. And as we have learned the hard way, and when I say we, I mean we collectively, the threats that we face today are not a traditional kind of threat. They're not what we sort of grew up with. We face adversaries who have no Air Force, no Navy, they don't wear uniforms, but they're deadly nonetheless. And chief among them are terrorist organizations such as Daesh, Al-Qaeda, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Jaish-e-Mohammed, and others. The battle to counter and defeat these extremists cannot and will not be won by one nation alone, nor by any single campaign. It is a global cause requiring consistent focus and persistent action, and a willingness to adapt our tactics as the threats evolve. And everybody knows law enforcement and nation states, to protect their people, have to get it right 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. But if you decide you want to kill yourself and you want to blow yourself up and take a few people with you, you only have to get it right for 10 minutes or an hour or maybe a day. That's the challenge. That's why it is so critical that we respond to what we both know. We both know the pain of terrorism. And to avoid repeating the tragedies that we've seen, our intelligence agencies now exchange information constantly. Our security personnel are learning from one another. We recently signed a special agreement to share terrorist screening data, and we are united in our efforts to dispel extremist propaganda and ties and lies. Now, together, we recognize that those who commit terrorist acts fundamentally have no respect for human life, certainly not for the dignity of other people. Their goal is to maim and kill and sow fear and division. In Iraq, Daesh kills Yazidis because they are Yazidis. They kill Shia because they are Shia. They kill Christians because they are Christians. And we learned long ago, certainly in World War II and the Holocaust, when we said the words "never again," that we would not accept people killing people because of who they are or what they believe. So we must not, and we will not allow them to succeed. We also recognize that we must respond to this scourge not only with the full force of our militaries and our justice systems, but we must strike at the root causes of violent extremism itself. And we have to work hard to understand the different variations of the causes, because it does vary country to country, location to location, place to place, even though there are constants in those causes. So what does that mean? It means combating and ending corruption wherever it exists, so you can rebuild trust in institutions and offer citizens an alternative to the bankrupt, dead-end ideologies that are supported by the terrorists. And make no mistake about it, a society that is governed, if you call it governing, that is run by, managed by, dominated by corruption, is a society that will frustrate people. It's a society where the future of every citizen not given an equal opportunity is stolen from them. And that makes them a potential extremist or terrorist, ripe for the picking of recruiters. So it means also that we have to build the bridges of tolerance and acceptance, compassion, and mutual understanding among every religion and sect. And I applaud all those people engaged in the interfaith efforts to reach out and define tolerance and also the beauty of their own religion, but in a way that is not either or I'll kill you, in a way that is respectful and respectful of history. It means offering young people hope and economic opportunity and faith in their own futures through access to education and good-paying jobs, because doing so will give them reason to help build their societies up, rather than resorting to violence that tears communities down. And going hand in hand with this concept of corruption, I might add, is just plain old bad governance. Bad governance. Governance that's more important in self-aggrandizement or in building up a party over a country, doing things at the expense of others. As we meet this challenge, my friends, the United States and India have to keep faith in our democratic values and hold fast to the freedoms that define our countries. We have to respect the rights of all of our citizens, regardless of ethnicity, language, or creed, in order to express their views and to allow them to protest in peace, without fear of reprisal or retribution, without the fear of being jailed for something that you say. And we have to work cooperatively and in good faith to ensure that terrorists have no place to run, no place to hide, and no place to plan and prepare for future attacks. Now, what we cannot do is allow the terrorist threat, even as we face it, to freeze us, to intimidate us, to lock us in place somehow. That would be giving in. We can't allow them to prevent us from building our economies and raising the quality of life for our citizens. This is the responsibility of leadership, and it falls on both the public and the private sector. And when you look at what's happened between our countries and what can happen, I got to tell you, there are lots of reasons to be optimistic. And the reasons are clear. The United States is blessed with the world's largest economy. India, blessed with the fastest growing major market in Asia. By 2030, India will be the globe's most populous nation, with a rising middle class of 500 million people and a huge reservoir of entrepreneurial ingenuity and talent. I just met 3 folks backstage, 3 young gentlemen who are all engaged, each of them in entrepreneurial efforts, and who took part in the Entrepreneurial Summit that we held in California this year. They're the future. And quite literally, my friends, the sky is the limit, and it's not just because of our close cooperation in aviation and space. Nobody should be satisfied. Even as we know that greater connectivity helps build prosperity and strengthen regional trust, South Asia remains the least interconnected market in the world. That's unacceptable. And even though we are witnessing impressive gains in India's economic growth, there is still a real question of whether or not we are doing so quickly enough. And that comes down to some pretty basic arithmetic. In order to just keep pace, India has to create 13 million jobs a year. By any standards, that's an enormous task. And to meet that goal, your entrepreneurs, like the young people trained here at IIT Delhi, urgently need the freedom to be able to go out and pursue ideas. They need the ability to start up a new business without a lot of red tape. They need to be able to access infrastructure that makes it easier to translate fresh concepts into successful companies. To succeed in today's rapidly moving marketplace, a globalized marketplace, which no politician, I don't care how much any politician runs around and rants and raves about globalization, the bottom line is no one can put that genie back in the bottle because it reflects what people want. People want goods that are cheaper. People want things from other countries. People want to trade. People want the ability to be able to have more information about the world and choose themselves what they use and what they discard. And any business in today's world has to be able to operate under conditions that attract investment capital, whether it's foreign capital or domestic capital. And capital seeks opportunity. It seeks stability. It seeks certainty. It seeks transparency and accountability. You have to have a market that is defined by fairness and transparency. You have to have a level playing field. You have to have sensible regulations. And anybody's bureaucracy has to become more streamlined and effective. It has to become a partner in making decisions, not an expert in setting up roadblocks. You got to adopt policies. All of us do. We have to do this at home in the United States too. We have to adopt policies faster. And here you have to do it in a way that provides opportunity for all Indians, men and women, urban and rural, farmers and workers in any industry. Now, President Obama and Prime Minister Modi, as I mentioned earlier, have really forged a pretty strong understanding between them. And we are very encouraged by the steps that the Prime Minister is taking to build on the efforts of his predecessors. The government has passed now the Goods and Services Tax Bill and new bankruptcy laws, and made changes in foreign investment regulations and enacted sound macroeconomic reforms. The government has pursued key initiatives like Startup India and Digital India. And next year, India will co-host the Global Entrepreneurship Summit, which will help further showcase the remarkable talent of this nation's entrepreneurs. Ultimately, the goal is to ensure that growth is not only impressive, but sustained, leading to healthy competition, more jobs, less poverty, and broad-based expansion that continues over the long haul. At the same time, here in India and across the globe, we are focused on yet another key test, and it is a key test. And that is the fight to preserve our environment, to expand clean energy, and combat climate change. And the reason I put all three of those in the same sentence is very simple. The solution to the problem of climate change is energy policy. The choices you make about energy policy will determine whether or not we as a planet survive and overcome this hurdle that has been built because of the ways we adopted to provide power to communities over history from the beginning of the Industrial Revolution without completely understanding what the consequences of those sources were. But now we understand. Now the science is clear. And now we have a responsibility to make the right choices. I have worked on this issue for more than a quarter of a century, and I cannot emphasize enough that the stakes could not be higher. Every month we hear that the month was hotter than the month before and hotter than the year before. The last year was the hottest year in human history, recorded. And the year before that. So that the last 10 years are the hottest decade in human history. But guess what? The 10 years before that are the second hottest. And the 10 years before that are the third hottest. And you would think after 3 decades, 30 years of hotter, 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 people would begin to get the message and understand the gravity of this challenge. So for India, progress is an urgent necessity because nearly 300 million people lack reliable access to electricity, which severely limits their ability to find a secure place in the global economy. And for the international community, the size of India's energy market means that how you choose to power your future will have a wide-ranging impact on the health and well-being of people everywhere. Because if all it is coal, we are all in trouble. We got to move away from those fuels that provide the worst consequences of CO2, ozone, and HFC challenge of the 1,000 times more destruction of the environment than CO2 itself. And that is why we strongly support Prime Minister Modi's plan to drive India's economy by increasing the share of renewable sources of power. Now, this goal is daunting, but let me tell you something. This goal is achievable. You're at 35 gigawatts of power today. You've got to go up to 175 in a short span of time. We understand the demand, but it's meetable. But do the real cost accounting. Because if you think that somehow coal is cheaper today, you're absolutely not accounting correctly, because the health problems that come with it, the global challenges of storms and increased global climate change, the fire, the problems of food, all of the attendant problems that come with it vastly outstrip in cost the cost of putting renewable and alternative energy in place today. So you have a chance. Emerging engineers who are here, innovators, entrepreneurs, participate in one of the most exciting economic opportunities we have ever faced on this planet, and that is the energy transformation. Not only will you have a chance to tap into a gigantic market of the future, you will be able to preserve the environment in doing it, you will reduce pollution in doing it, you will cut health risks in doing it, you will create economic opportunity in doing it, you will raise the standard of living in doing it, and you will live up to our individual responsibility that runs deep in the culture of India of preserving the planet for future generations. India and the United States have created a great partnership in this field, and I know it is going to make a difference. In fact, properly pursued, it could make all the difference. For example, as a result of our recent civil nuclear agreement, Westinghouse is poised to build a half-dozen reactors that will provide electricity to 60 million Indians, and it is emissions-free. And with the technologies we've developed and the knowledge we have today, modern generation, fourth-generation nuclear power is safe, and something we can deal with far more effectively than the consequences of what happens with some of the other choices of sources of power. Through our partnership in the advanced clean energy, known as PACE, we are collaborating on smart grids, energy storage, solar, biofuels, and green buildings. And this week we launched the PACE Fellowship Program to bring mid-career professionals together with experts at our national laboratories in order to advance our shared mission of a more sustainable future. We're also conducting joint research and developing projects. We're supporting early stage technologies and startups, and we're exploring new ways to finance clean energy with private sector backing. And as a result of our shared commitment and leadership, the United States and India were among the nearly 200 countries that came together in Paris last December to negotiate the most ambitious agreement ever reached to combat climate change. Now, let me make this clear. I don't believe, and I think most people believe, that government is going to wind up saving us from the challenge we've created for ourselves. I believe the private sector is going to do it. What government can do is set the stage, create the framework, create the enticements, release the energy, help to shape the response. But in the end, some entrepreneur, maybe one of you sitting right here, is going to discover the trick for battery storage, or find a way to have a solar panel that's even more efficient and less costly, and help us turn the key that makes these changes in time. Despite all the efforts that I have cited here this morning, I have actually barely scratched the surface of the breadth of the partnership of India and the United States today, economically, diplomatically, and politically. We're currently engaged in about 70 different initiatives that we are working on together. Prime Minister Modi was right. He was dead on target when he told the U.S. Congress earlier this year, I quote, that our shared ideals and common philosophy of freedom shape the bedrock of our ties. But what we've built on top of that bedrock, my friends, is the product of the long and deep connection between our citizens. It is the work of hundreds of thousands of American and Indian youth who study on one another's campuses and learn from each other, just not as classmates and peers, but also as friends. It's the energy and the understanding that comes from the more than 1 million visitors who each year tour each other's extraordinary mountains and rivers, our great cities and our fertile valleys, and our matchless cultural and historical landmarks. It grows out of countless collaborations between our engineers, doctors, teachers, craftspersons, soldiers, and sailors. And it emerges from the stories of individuals like the young Indian geneticist, Dr. M.S. Swaminathan, who half a century ago, right around the time IIT Delhi reached out to a scientist from Iowa named Norman Borlaug to devise a new approach to feed India's fast-rising population and revolutionize, in that step, wheat and food production here in this country. That partnership literally changed the world. This progress in the past forms the sturdy foundation for what we can achieve together in the future, and I hope you feel that. It is what will enable us to overcome what Prime Minister Modi called the hesitations of history, and we all know what he meant by that. And it will allow us to forge an even closer relationship. It allows us to imagine a day when our navies are patrolling the seas side by side to secure the lanes of commerce. A day when our businesses and our universities are increasingly interconnected and trade ties reach their full potential and our citizens can enter and travel across both of our countries with the greatest of ease. A day when it's the norm and the expectation for our scientists and researchers to share lab space in the hopes of eradicating disease, poverty, and hunger worldwide. It is a day, I believe, in the not-too-distant future, if we are simply willing to put in the time and the effort to keep this relationship strong and lasting, and to do the job of nurturing it day to day to make sure that happens. Yes, this vision is ambitious, and it should be, but it's also achievable. Just remember what Dr. Swaminathan said. Once, I think he said something to the effect that the word impossible exists mainly in our minds, but given the requisite will and effort, great tasks can be accomplished. Every one of you sitting here, whether you're student, faculty, or private sector, you understand that because that's exactly how you got where you are and how you know where you're going. The fact is that this is a country with a remarkable ethnic and religious diversity, a complexity that is extraordinary. And many people thought it would have been impossible for something like that to thrive as an open democracy. A lot of people thought it was impossible to lift over 100 million people out of poverty and create the world's largest middle class. A lot of people thought it was impossible for India to be on the cutting edge of technology and join an elite group of countries on the vanguard of space exploration. But the beauty of India and the United States is our history of making the impossible a reality. And I believe that for our two nations, the possibilities are limitless. So thank you for letting me share a few thoughts with you today. I look forward to what America and India can achieve together in the long run. Thank you.